Hello learners, today we are looking at a new novel, Middlemarch by George Eliot. Middlemarch has the subtitle of A Study of Provincial Life. The novel was written by the English author Mary Ann Evans under the male pseudonym George Eliot, appearing in 8 installments from 1871 to 1872. The novel is set in the fictitious Midlands town of Middlemarch from 1829 to 1832. Therefore, the novel is a historical novel set in the past. Eliot's novel, which is set in this imaginary town of Middlemarch, is said to be probably based on Coventry in the county of Warwickshire, where she had lived prior to moving to London. Middlemarch uses the technique of realism. What is literary realism? Well, it is a part of the realist art movement which began in the mid-19th century French literature and Russian literature and extended to the late 19th and early 20th century. Literary realism attempts to represent familiar, ordinary, day-to-day lives and banal existence of humans just the way they are. It does not believe in romanticizing everyday life. The novel presents before us some important historical events, namely the 1832 Reform Act, the early railways, and the accession of King William IV. Students, it is important to know a little about the 1832 Reform Act. In 1832, the English Parliament passed a law changing the British electoral system. It was known as the Great Reform Act. This was a response to many years of people criticizing the electoral system as unfair. The law took seats in the House of Commons away from the less populated boroughs and gave seats to the new industrial cities, which had sprung up as a result of the Industrial Revolution. It also lowered the property qualifications for voting. Middlemarch, which is set in 1829 to 32, has an environment in which stereotypical gender roles were very strictly enforced. Men were seen as the breadwinners and women were seen to be the ones to look after the family. Through the novel's central character, Dorothea Brooke, the novel presents the way how societal expectations are particularly suffocating for women. At the same time, the novel also shows us that this resistance on the part of women is inherently limited, as alternative ways of living for women at that time simply did not exist. Dorothea dreams of having a meaningful life. She has great qualities and she is an extraordinary woman. Her qualities are incompatible to the roles set for her by society, that is, of a wifehood and motherhood only. Dorothea is fond of horse riding. She dreams of building cottages for tenant farmers so that they might live in better conditions. These passions do not conform with societal expectations of a woman. And so, even though these dreams and impulses exist very strongly within Dorothea, she feels ashamed of them and she tries to suppress them. In an attempt to conform to a feminine ideal, she makes the big mistake. Her choice to marry the much older Reverend Casaubon. Dorothea does so because Casaubon is a scholar working on a highly ambitious project on theological history called The Key to All Mythologies. Dorothea believes that by marrying a scholar like Casaubon, she too can access the intensity and greatness that she craves via him. Dorothea claims that she wants a husband who can be like a father to her and teach her about things. However, as her guardian Mr. Arthur Brooke pointed out, she is a strong-willed person attached to her own opinions. Marrying Casaubon is thus a recipe for disaster. Dorothea's decision to marry Casaubon is not made out of mere foolishness. Rather, Dorothea is trapped by the conflict between her own impulses and the society's expectations of her as a woman. When Casaubon dies, Dorothea has a chance to think of her life again. This time, she falls in love truly with Will Ladislaw and ends up choosing a path that brings her far greater happiness and fulfillment. This shows that it is better to stay true to oneself than to attempt to conform to society's restrictive ideals. However, Dorothea's ultimate fate as a housewife and motherhood in Victorian England reminds readers that there is only so much women could do to resist gender roles in a society that had so few rights and opportunities available to women. Dorothea loves Will, but her own dreams of the cottages and the colony she planned to build for tenant farmers remain unrealized at the end of the novel. Coming to how Middlemarch depicts disappointment in marriages. Most 19th century novels often ended with a happy marriage, like that of Elizabeth and Darcy in Pride and Prejudice. However, Middlemarch depicts a series of marriages in the novel that are often filled with disappointment and conflicts. The novel presents the idea that marriage is not the ultimate ambition. In case of the young doctor Tertius Lydgate, his obsessive, single-minded focus on his career as a doctor leads him to make a big mistake by marrying Rosamond Vincy, with whom he is fundamentally incompatible. The marriage proves to be miserable, and towards the end of the novel, Tertius Lydgate dies. Again, in choosing to marry the much older Edward Casaubon, Dorothea attempts to reconcile her own ideas and ambitions with the role of a married woman that she is expected to play in society. Casaubon is a scholar who has been working on an ambitious work of theological writing called The Key to All Mythologies. Dorothea dreams of assisting her husband in his research work. But this proves to be not, because firstly, Casaubon himself is not well read and his research is not up to the mark. And also, Casaubon does not believe Dorothea to be his intellectual equal and thus does not want her assistance. Dorothea's miserable union with Casaubon becomes the primary example of disastrous marriage in the novel. Coming to how the novel depicts provincial life. The novel has the subtitle A Study of Provincial Life. It is very aptly used by George Eliot as the novel depicts what provincial life is. Provincial would indicate the towns outside the capital city of London. In this case, provincial life of the town of Middlemarch. In Victorian England, the class system was very rigid. In Middlemarch, people are found to be obsessed with family reputation in such provincial setups. Rosamond eagerly marries Lydgate because he comes from a noble family, and she wants to improve her own social standing. She ignores that in reality Lydgate is poor. In the end, his lack of wealth makes their marriage miserable when Lydgate incurs heavy debt to satisfy the expensive habits of his wife. Bastards, or those whose families can't be traced, are treated with suspicion, as in case of Joshua Riggs and Blustrode. Anyone who is different or who does not have a good family reputation is immediately subjected to grave scrutiny in the provincial setup of Middlemarch. This obsession with status in Middlemarch distinguishes Middlemarch from more metropolitan parts of England like London. In this sense, the obsession with hierarchy and status within the Middlemarch community keeps the community back while other parts of the country advance. The provincial life is also further evident by the fact that the characters are all connected to one another in this intimate setting of Middlemarch. While this close-knit aspect of the community has positive angles, overall the novel intends to show us the way that small communities like Middlemarch can generate narrow-mindedness. There are many instances when the townspeople help one another, such as when Caleb Garth takes on the wayward Fred Vincy as an apprentice, and when Dorothea writes Lydgate a £10,000 cheque so he is no longer in debt to Bulstrode. However, overall, the small town aspect of life in the town forces the community and its members to remain stuck in an old-fashioned world where they refuse reforms of any form. The novel also depicts various forms of reform. The narrator refers to the period in which the novel is set as the anti-reform times. Middlemarch then too is an anti-reform era, as most residents remain at least a little suspicious of the reforms and progresses taking place. The backdrop of the novel is the tumultuous political change that occurred due to the Reform Act of 1832. This parliamentary act, as discussed previously, created changes in an undemocratic system of political representation. It expanded voting rights, and it simultaneously abolished aspects of the electoral system that allowed wealthy noblemen to wield power. Within the novel, Mr. Brooke and Will Ladislaw are the most prominent supporters of the reform platform. Both are committed to the agenda, but they face ostracization and ridicule. It becomes clear that most residents of Middlemarch will use any excuse to oppose reform and paint Brooke and Ladislaw's platform as dangerous and radical. The intense opposition that Brooke and Ladislaw encounter during their campaign highlights the rather extreme extent to which Middlemarch residents are against any kind of political reform. Now, coming to the question of medical progress and reform, it is mostly explored through the character of Tertius Lydgate. Lydgate is a young doctor who has thrown his life into medicine with great passion. He is especially eager about the cause of medical reform and gets involved with the new hospital being built in Middlemarch. He also believes that doctors should merely prescribe medicine and not sell them. Indeed, the narrator explains that Lydgate was attracted to medicine because it was a field in need of reform. The issue of medical reform is not just one of justice. It actually endangers Middlemarch residents by leading them to be treated by incapable doctors. This problem is shown in the novel when Fred Vincy suffers typhoid fever and is prescribed the wrong medicine by Vincy's family doctor, Mr. Wrench. It is only when Tertius Lydgate intervenes and gives the correct diagnosis that Fred's condition slowly improves. Lastly, we see in the novel when Caleb Garth attempts to plan the construction of a railway through Lowick, the narrator explains that Middlemarch residents are totally unenthusiastic about this new industrial technology of railway travel, which women of the community deem presumptuous and dangerous. So to conclude, the novel shows how the Middlemarchers are adamantly opposed to both political and scientific reform out of both fear of change and attachment to their old ways of life. Thank you all for watching. Please like and subscribe to this channel.